The rain in New York City doesn't just fall, it seems to wash the color right out of the world, turning everything into a blur of gray and silver. It was one of those Tuesdays where the sky hung low and heavy, pressing down on the rooftops, making everyone hurry just a little bit faster. The gutters were gurgling with water, and the sidewalks were slick with reflective puddles that trapped the headlights of passing taxis. It wasn't a day for standing still. It was a day for ducking under awnings, burying your chin in your scarf, and moving with your head down. On a particularly busy street corner, away from the bright lights of the main theaters and expensive hotels, a man stood waiting for a break in the traffic. He didn't look like anyone special. In fact, if you were to walk past him and hundreds of people did just that, you wouldn't have given him a second glance. He was wearing a heavy, dark blue hoodie that had seen better days. The fabric was pilled at the elbows, and the color had faded slightly from too many washes. On his legs were a pair of loose, distressed jeans, the kind that looked comfortable rather than fashionable, fraying at the hems where they dragged over his boots. He wore a black baseball cap pulled down low over his forehead. The brim shadowed his eyes, hiding a face that had been seen on millions of movie screens around the world. But here, in the cold drizzle of a Tuesday afternoon, he was just a silhouette. He was a shadow moving through the wet concrete canyons of the city. This was Keanu Reeves? But to the woman rushing past him talking loudly on her phone, or the construction worker carrying a bundle of steel pipes, he was just another guy trying to stay dry. He shoved his hands deep into the pockets of his hoodie, hunching his shoulders against the wind. He wasn't looking for paparazzi. He wasn't looking for fans asking for selfies or autographs. He was just looking for a quiet corner and maybe something hot to eat. He turned a corner and spotted a small diner. The sign above the door buzzed with a faint neon hum, a warm orange glow in the middle of the gray day. It wasn't a fancy place. It wasn't the kind of restaurant that required a reservation. It looked like the kind of spot where the coffee was strong, the plates were heavy, and nobody cared who you were as long as you didn't cause trouble. Keanu paused for a moment on the sidewalk, looking at his reflection in the diner's window. He saw a tired man staring back. He smiled a little to himself, amused by the disguise. It was almost funny how easy it was to disappear. You didn't need a magic trick. You just needed an old hoodie and the right attitude. He took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of wet asphalt and frying onions, and pushed the door open. A bell chimed above the door, a cheerful little ding that was instantly drowned out by the noise inside. The diner was packed. The air was thick with the smell of bacon, burnt coffee, and damp wool. Every seat at the counter was taken, and the booths were filled with people shaking off their umbrellas and loudly complaining about the weather. Keanu stepped inside, the warmth hitting his face like a blanket. He stood by the door for a second, scanning the room. He looked small in that doorway. He didn't command the space. He waited patiently while a young couple argued about where to put their wet coats. He didn't tap his foot. He didn't sigh with annoyance. He just waited. Finally, he spotted a small, empty booth in the back corner. It was squeezed between a rack of potato chips and a wall covered in old black and white photos of the city from 50 years ago. It was the kind of seat that most people would walk past, too tight and too far from the action. But for him, it was perfect. He walked through the narrow aisles, navigating around a waitress carrying a tray stacked high with burgers and fries. He moved carefully, mumbling a quiet sorry as he squeezed past a table, trying not to bump anyone with his bag. He reached the booth and sat down. The vinyl seat squeaked under his weight. He let out a long, slow breath, the tension in his shoulders dropping as he sank into the corner. From this spot, he could see the whole restaurant without being seen. He was like a ghost in the machine, an observer of the human race. He watched the cook flipping eggs behind the counter, the spatula hitting the grill with a rhythmic clack clack clack. He watched a businessman in a suit typing furiously on his laptop, coffee forgotten at his elbow. He watched an old man feeding bits of his toast to a small dog hidden under his table. Keanu reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a battered paperback novel. The cover was bent, and the pages were yellowed. It was a story about detectives and old secrets, the kind of book that takes you away from reality. He opened it up, trying to find his page, but the diner was too loud. It was hard to focus on the words when the clatter of silverware and the roar of conversations filled his ears. But he didn't mind. He liked the noise. It felt real. It felt grounded. A young woman walked past his table, wiping down the surface of the booth next to his with a rag. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there was a stain on her apron that looked like gravy. She didn't even look at him. To her, he was just another body filling a chair, another order to write down. Keanu watched her for a moment, his eyes soft. He knew what it was like to work hard, to be on your feet all day, to keep going even when your legs felt like lead. He respected the grind. He respected the hustle. He placed the book on the table, next to the napkin dispenser, and rested his chin on his hand. He felt invisible, and it was a wonderful feeling. Here, he wasn't the star of blockbuster action movies. He wasn't the guy who did the crazy stunts. He wasn't the face on the posters. He was just a man in a hoodie who wanted a club sandwich and some peace. The minutes ticked by. The lunch rush was hitting its peak. The door kept opening and closing, letting in cold gusts of wind every time someone new entered. The noise level rose, a chaotic symphony of city life. Keanu sat there, perfectly still, a small island of calm in the middle of the storm. He watched a drop of water slide down the window next to him, tracing a path through the condensation. He looked at the menu tucked between the ketchup bottle and the salt shaker. He didn't need to look at it, he knew what he wanted, but he picked it up anyway, just to have something to hold. It was greasy to the touch, the corners curled up from years of use. He scanned the list of specials, his eyes moving slowly down the page. Meatloaf surprise, daily soup, world's best burger. He was just another customer, hungry and tired. He shifted in his seat, stretching his legs out under the table, trying to get comfortable. The boots he wore were heavy, made for walking, not sitting. He leaned back, the hoodie bunching up behind his neck. Nobody in the diner knew that the man sitting in the corner, the one they were ignoring, the one who looked like he might be between jobs or just taking a break from a construction site, was a millionaire. Nobody knew that he could buy the entire building 10 times over. That was the beauty of it. Money, fame, success, it all disappeared when you put on the right clothes and sat in the right corner. Stripped of the glamour, he was just human. Flesh and blood, waiting for lunch, just like everyone else. He looked up as the waitress with the gravy stain walked by again. She looked frantic now, balancing 3 plates in one hand and a jug of coffee in the other. She was sweating slightly, her face flushed with the heat of the kitchen and the stress of the crowd. Keanu watched her, his eyes full of empathy. He knew that in a few minutes, she would come to his table. He knew he would have to decide whether to speak up or just point. But for now, he just watched. He was content to wait. He was content to be a nobody in a city full of somebodies. The rain continued to drum against the glass, a steady rhythm that matched the beating of his heart. He was here, in the moment, present and accounted for. No scripts, no cameras, no yelling directors. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the smell of fried food, and the simple, profound pleasure of being left alone. He closed his eyes for a brief second, listening to the sound of the world turning around him, a silent smile hidden under the shadow of his cap. This was real life. And it was exactly where he wanted to be. The kitchen swing door flew open with a violent bang, bouncing off the rubber stopper and swinging back again. A wall of heat rolled out into the dining area, carrying with it the thick, heavy scent of frying onions, stale grease, and strong coffee. It was the smell of hard work. For the young woman walking through that door, it was just another Tuesday in a long string of Tuesdays that blended together into one exhausting blur. She was a server at the diner, a job that looked easy from the outside but was actually a constant test of physical endurance and mental patience. She had been on her feet since 6 in the morning. Her sneakers, once white and clean, were now scuffed and stained with dark streaks of spilled coffee and gravy. The arches of her feet throbbed with every step she took, a sharp, rhythmic pain that shot up her calves. She tried to shift her weight from one foot to the other as she walked, but there was no relief. The floor of the diner was hard concrete covered in thin linoleum, and it offered no forgiveness. She blew a stray strand of hair out of her face, her hands full of heavy, oval plates. The lunch rush was in full swing, and the dining room was a chaotic sea of hungry people. Every table was full. Every chair was occupied. The noise level was incredible, a mixture of clattering silverware, the low hum of conversations, the shrill laughter of a group of tourists in the front window, and the constant, demanding shouts from the kitchen. "Order up! Table 4. Don't let it get cold!" The chef yelled from behind the pass, his voice cutting through the din like a siren. The young woman grimaced. She felt like she was juggling a dozen glass balls in the air, and it was only a matter of time before one dropped. She didn't hate her job, but days like this tested her soul. She was a single mother trying to keep the lights on, trying to save enough for a car that didn't break down every other week. Every tip was a gas bill paid. Every difficult customer was a hurdle she had to jump over to get to the finish line. She navigated the narrow aisles of the diner like a soldier in a minefield. She dodged a small child running wildly with a toy truck and sidestepped a businessman who had abruptly pushed his chair back without looking. She slammed the plates down on table 4, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "Here you go, guys. 2 cheeseburgers, fries on the side. Can I get you anything else?" she asked, her voice brisk and breathless. "We asked for no pickles," the man at the table said immediately, pointing an accusing finger at the bun. "I can't eat pickles." The young woman felt a familiar tightness in her chest. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice straining to stay polite. "I'll take that back and get you a fresh one. It'll just be 2 minutes." She grabbed the plate and turned around, fighting the urge to sigh. Taking the plate back to the kitchen meant explaining the mistake to the chef, who was already in a foul mood. It meant the other tables would have to wait 30 seconds longer for their refills. It was a domino effect, and right now, the dominoes were falling all over the place. As she marched back toward the kitchen, her eyes scanned her section. She was responsible for the back half of the restaurant, including the dark, quiet corner booth. She had noticed someone sit down there earlier, but she hadn't had a chance to even breathe, let alone take an order. She glanced over and saw the man in the blue hoodie. He was just sitting there, reading a paperback book. He wasn't waving his arm. He wasn't looking around impatiently. He wasn't checking his watch. He was just waiting. In her experience, This was rare. Most customers acted as if their need for a diet soda was the most important emergency in the world. This guy, however, seemed to understand that she was busy. She appreciated that, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. She had to move. She dropped off the defective burger at the kitchen and grabbed a coffee pot with her other hand. She needed to get to that corner booth before he got tired of waiting. If she waited too long, he might get annoyed, and she just didn't have the energy for a confrontation today. She walked over to the booth, her legs feeling like lead weights. As she got closer, she took a quick mental inventory. She hadn't seen his face clearly yet. He was just a shape in a hoodie, a background character in the busy movie of her shift. She reached the table and leaned over, slightly out of breath. "Sorry for the wait," she said, the words coming out automatically, like a script she had recited 1,000 times. She didn't really look at him. She was looking past him, at table 7, who was signaling for a check. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead. She was thinking about the ketchup bottles she needed to fill and the dirty dishes piling up in the window. She dropped a laminated menu onto the table. It slid a little across the surface, bumped against the salt shaker, and stopped. It wasn't a graceful move, but she was past caring about grace. She just wanted efficiency. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice flat. She clicked her pen, hovering it over her order pad, ready to write. She finally looked down at the customer. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low, shadows hiding his eyes. He had a bit of gray stubble on his chin. He looked rough around the edges, like someone who had been traveling or working outside. He didn't look like he had much money to spend, but in this diner, that didn't matter. Cash was cash. The man looked up from his book. He closed the pages gently, marking his spot with a finger. When he looked at her, he didn't look annoyed. He didn't look at his watch. He looked at her face. He really looked at her. He saw the sweat on her forehead. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes. He saw the stain on her apron. "No problem at all," he said. His voice was quiet, low, and surprisingly calm. It was a nice voice. It didn't have that sharp, demanding edge that so many customers had. "I know it's crazy in here today. You guys are running a marathon." The waitress blinked, slightly taken aback. Most people didn't comment on the chaos, they just complained that it was affecting them. It had been a long time since a customer acknowledged that she was actually working hard. For a second, she paused, her pen hovering. She felt a small crack in her armor of stress. "Yeah, it's non-stop," she muttered, offering a half-smile that was more tired than happy. "Anyway, what can I get you?" He looked down at the menu, even though he probably already knew what he wanted. He took his time. He wasn't rushing her. "Just a black coffee, please," he said. "And the club sandwich. If the bread is toasted, that would be great." "Club sandwich. Coffee. Toasted bread," she repeated, scribbling the shorthand onto her pad. "Anything else? Fries, onion rings?" He shook his head slightly. "That's all I need. Thank you." She nodded, ripping the paper slip from her pad. "I'll get that coffee right out for you." She turned and walked away, already shifting her focus back to the kitchen. She didn't say "You're welcome." She didn't make small talk about the book he was reading. She didn't ask him how his day was going. She was moving too fast. She felt like a machine that was overheating. If she stopped to be nice, if she stopped to chat, she was afraid she might fall apart. She had to keep moving. She had to keep the plates spinning. Behind the counter, she shoved the order ticket onto the metal spindle for the chef. She grabbed the coffee pot she had brought with her and poured a fresh cup for the man in the corner. The coffee was hot and black, steam rising in a thin spiral. She carried it back to the table, dodging a busboy who was clearing dishes with a loud clatter. She set the cup down on a saucer in front of him. A tiny splash of coffee jumped out and landed on the table. She didn't even have a napkin in her hand to wipe it up. "Here's your coffee," she said. "The food won't be long. Kitchen is backed up a bit, so maybe 15 minutes. "Take your time," he said again, looking up. "I'm in no rush. Seriously, don't worry about it." He reached out and took the cup, wrapping his hands around it to warm them. He gave her a small, appreciative nod. It was such a small gesture, but it felt strangely significant. In the middle of all the yelling and rushing and clanging, this booth was a pocket of silence. He wasn't demanding. He was just present. "Okay," she said, lingering for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. She looked at the coffee spill on the table. "Sorry about the mess." "It's just coffee," he said, smiling. "It cleans up." She forced a tighter smile and turned away. She felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. Guilt because she knew she wasn't giving him great service. She was brisk, tired, and messy. She felt like she should be trying harder to be friendly. But relief because he wasn't making her life harder. He was easy. And on a day like today, easy was the best thing she could ask for. She rushed back to the counter, her mind already drifting to the next crisis. Table 2 needed more water. Table 9 was asking for the check. The phone at the register was ringing. As she grabbed a pitcher of water, she glanced back one last time at the corner booth. The man was already back to reading his book. He sat sideways in the booth, one leg tucked up, holding the coffee cup in one hand and the book in the other. He looked completely at peace. He looked like he didn't have a care in the world. He was just a guy in a hoodie, killing time in a diner while the rain poured down outside. She watched him for a heartbeat, wondering what his story was. Why was he here alone on a Tuesday? Why did he look so tired, yet so content? But the water pitcher was heavy, and the phone was still ringing. The moment passed. She looked away, her brain switching back into survival mode. She didn't have time to wonder about the customers. She just had to serve them. She marched toward table 2, her shoes squeaking on the floor, leaving the quiet man in the corner to his book and his thoughts, completely unaware that she had just served one of the most famous people on the planet, and completely missing the gentle kindness he was offering her in return. She was just trying to get through the shift, one cup of coffee at a time. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling heavier than the last. The lunch rush was reaching its breaking point. In the kitchen, the chaos was absolute. The chef was a blur of motion, shouting orders, slamming pans, and wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The heat was intense, warping the air above the grills. The ticket machine was spitting out long white strips of paper like a never-ending tongue, each one representing another person waiting for food, another demand on the staff's time. The young waitress stood at the counter, her eyes scanning the tickets frantically. Her brain felt like a computer that had too many windows open. She was trying to remember which table needed water, which table needed ketchup, and which table was waiting for their check. Her apron pocket was stuffed with crumpled receipts and pens that didn't work. She felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine, making her shiver slightly in the air conditioning. "Order up. Table 8. Club sandwich. The chef yelled, sliding a plate along the metal counter. The waitress grabbed the plate. It was heavy. A stack of turkey, bacon, lettuce, and tomato on 3 slices of toast, held together with frilly toothpicks. A small pile of potato chips sat next to it. It looked like a standard lunch. In her haste, she didn't look too closely. She didn't check the details. She just saw a sandwich and assumed it was the one she had ordered for the quiet man in the corner. She was operating on muscle memory, moving as fast as she could to keep the ship from sinking. She turned and marched toward the back booth. She dodged a busboy carrying a bin full of dirty dishes, the clatter of silverware against glass ringing in her ears. She was tired. Her feet were throbbing, and her patience was hanging by a thread. She just wanted to drop the food off, clear the table, and maybe steal 30 seconds to drink a glass of water herself. When she reached the booth, the man was still reading his book. He looked so peaceful there, tucked away in his own little world. For a second, she felt a pang of jealousy. He didn't have a screaming chef in his ear. He didn't have customers snapping their fingers at him. He was just sitting. "Here you go," she said, placing the plate down on the table with a little more force than she intended. The rattle of the china made him look up. "Club sandwich. Enjoy." She didn't wait for a response. She didn't ask if he needed anything else. She spun around on her heel and headed straight for the coffee station to refill the pitchers. She was already thinking about the next 5 tasks she had to do. Behind her, the man looked at the sandwich. He paused. He lifted the top slice of bread and peeked inside. He wasn't fussy, but he noticed immediately. It wasn't a club sandwich. It was a cheeseburger. A double cheeseburger with bacon. The kitchen had made a mistake, or rather, she had grabbed the wrong plate in her hurry. The waitress was pouring coffee when the realization hit her. She stopped mid-pour, the black coffee swirling in the glass pot. Her brain finally processed what she had just delivered. She had ordered the club sandwich. The plate she had carried had a bun, not toast. It had a burger patty, not turkey. It was the order for table 6, not the corner booth. "Oh no," she whispered to herself. Her stomach dropped. She felt that hot, prickly feeling of embarrassment rising up her neck. Not another mistake. Not today. The chef was already mad at her for the pickles incident. If she went back and said she took the wrong food to the wrong table, he was going to lose it. And the customer, the poor guy in the corner who had been so nice about waiting, was going to be annoyed. Everyone hated having their food taken away after it had just landed. She quickly finished filling the pitcher and shoved it onto the burner. She grabbed a clean rag and wiped her hands nervously on her apron. She had to go back. She had to fix it. She took a deep breath, trying to plaster a look of confidence on her face that she definitely didn't feel, and turned back toward the booth. As she walked over, she watched him. He hadn't called her back. He hadn't waved his arms. He hadn't shouted out that she had made a mistake. He had simply taken the top bun off the burger and set it aside, as if he was preparing to eat it anyway just so she wouldn't feel bad. That small act stopped her in her tracks for a split second. It was such a decent thing to do. She reached the table and stood there, feeling small. "I am so sorry," she blurted out, her voice rushing out in a tumble of words. "I think I gave you the wrong plate. That is a cheeseburger. You ordered the club sandwich. The kitchen is so backed up, I just grabbed the first thing I saw. I am such an idiot. I'll take this back and get you the right one. I'm so sorry." She was rambling. She knew she was rambling. But she felt terrible. He had been patient, and this was how she repaid him, by giving him someone else's greasy burger. The man looked up at her. He had his hands resting on the table, one on either side of the plate. He didn't look angry. He didn't look disappointed. He just looked at her with those calm, dark eyes. He was about to speak, probably to tell her it was okay, that he would eat the burger, but something in her brain shifted. The panic of the mistake, mixed with the exhaustion of the day, made her stare at him a little harder than she had before. Now that she was standing still, really looking at him to gauge his mood, the resemblance struck her like a slap in the face. She looked at the nose. The shape of the jaw. The way his hair curled slightly under the brim of the baseball cap. The specific, sad but kind set of his mouth. It was unmistakable. It was like looking at a poster from a video store window, except this version was older, a little more worn around the edges, and sitting in a cheap booth in a hoodie. She froze. Her mouth opened slightly. The words "I'll take it back" died in her throat. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She leaned in closer, forgetting for a moment about the coffee pots and the angry chef. She squinted her eyes, tilting her head to the side. You look exactly like that guy." The man paused. He didn't pull away. He didn't get defensive. He just waited, a faint, almost amused smile touching the corners of his lips. "Which guy?" he asked softly. He knew the answer. Of course he knew the answer. But he played along. "You know," she said, waving her hand vaguely in the air, trying to pull the name out of her tired brain. "The action guy. The woe guy. Keanu Reeves? You look just like him." It was crazy. It had to be a coincidence. Why would Keanu Reeves be eating in this diner? Why would he be dressed in old clothes and sitting alone in the corner? It didn't make sense. But the likeness was uncanny. It was distracting. For a second, the stress of the rush melted away, replaced by the bizarre curiosity of the moment. The man chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. It was a humble sound. "Yeah, I get that a lot," he said. He didn't say "Yes, it is me." He didn't say "No, I get that all the time, but I'm actually a janitor." He just left it hanging there, a polite mystery in the middle of a busy Tuesday. The waitress looked at the burger on the table. Then she looked at his hoodie. Then she looked at the diner: peeling paint, noisy fans, sticky floors. Her brain, tired and overwhelmed, tried to make sense of it all. She couldn't accept that a movie star would be here, in this specific spot, looking like a regular guy. It felt easier to dismiss it. It felt safer to make a joke of it than to believe the impossible. She let out a short, incredulous laugh. She shook her head, her ponytail swishing behind her. She felt a sudden need to explain why this couldn't be real, as if telling him would help her believe it herself. "Well, don't worry," she said, her voice taking on a slightly pitying, dismissive tone. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it was born out of her own cynicism. "I mean, the real Keanu Reeves wouldn't be caught dead eating in a place like this dressed like that." She gestured to his hoodie, to the diner, to the reality of the situation. "He's probably off eating at some fancy restaurant right now. Or on a yacht. You know, you've got the face, but the vibe is all wrong for a celebrity." She laughed again, a nervous, tired laugh, trying to diffuse the weird tension she had created. "He definitely wouldn't be eating a burger from a chipped plate in the corner," she added, wiping her hands on her apron again. "Anyway, let me get this order fixed. I'm really sorry about the mix-up. She stood there, waiting for him to agree with her. She expected him to laugh and say, "Yeah, I know, right, I wish I was him." That was the normal script. That was how these interactions usually went when a customer looked like someone famous. But the man didn't laugh. He didn't agree. He didn't look offended, either. He just looked at her with those intense, thoughtful eyes. He didn't seem to care that she had just insulted his clothes and the restaurant. He didn't seem to mind that she had dismissed the possibility that he was anyone important. The air around the table seemed to slow down. The noise of the diner, the clattering plates, the shouting chef, the rain against the window faded into the background. It was just the two of them in that small booth. A waitress who was having the worst day, and a man who was being treated like a nobody, even when she suspected he might be a somebody. He looked down at the burger again. Then he looked back up at her. The silence stretched for a second longer than was comfortable. The waitress shifted her weight, suddenly feeling a strange prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She had made a mistake with the food, and now she felt like she might have made a mistake with her words, too. But she couldn't figure out why. She was just stating the obvious, wasn't she? The man reached out and picked up a French fry from the plate. He held it up, looking at it contemplatively, as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. "You know," he said finally, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through her nervous chatter. "This place has really good fries." He took a bite of the fry, chewing slowly. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He wasn't trying to be humble or arrogant. He was just eating a fry. The waitress blinked, confused. Yeah, they're okay. A little soggy sometimes. But look, about the sandwich." "Don't worry about it," he said again, cutting her off gently. He pushed the burger plate slightly toward the center of the table, as if staking a claim on it. "The mistake is fine. Really. I'm happy to eat this." He smiled at her, and it was a smile that seemed to carry a lot of weight behind it. It wasn't just a polite customer service smile. It was the smile of someone who understood that life was messy, that mistakes happened, and that getting angry over a burger was a waste of energy. The waitress stood there, feeling completely off balance. She had expected him to be annoyed by the wrong food. She had expected him to either deny looking like the actor or proudly admit it. She had not expected this. She had not expected him to just accept the mess she had made, the wrong order and the awkward comment, with such total grace. She opened her mouth to argue, to insist on taking the plate back, but something in his eyes stopped her. He wanted her to leave it. He wanted her to stop worrying. For some reason, this stranger in the hoodie was trying to make her feel better, even though she was the one who had messed up. "Okay," she said slowly, drawing the word out. "If you're sure. I can still get the sandwich if you want." "I'm sure," he said. He picked up the burger. "It looks perfect. Enjoy your shift. Try not to run too fast. You'll wear yourself out." He took a bite of the burger, dismissing her with a kindness that she hadn't encountered in a long time. The waitress stood there for another heartbeat, feeling the strange weight of the moment, before she finally nodded and turned away. She walked back to the counter, her mind spinning. She still couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something important, but she had customers waiting. She shook her head, trying to clear it, and grabbed the next order. It was just a burger, she told herself. Just a guy who looked like a movie star. Nothing more. But as she poured more coffee, she found herself glancing back at the corner booth, wondering why she felt so wrong about what she had just said. The waitress walked back toward the service counter, but her feet felt heavier than before. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion of the shift. It was a strange, nagging feeling in her chest that she couldn't quite shake off. She replayed the conversation in her head as she grabbed a clean mug from the stack. The real Keanu Reeves wouldn't be caught dead eating in a place like this. Why had she said that? It was true, in a way. People like him lived in a different world, a world with velvet ropes and private chefs. But saying it out loud felt wrong. It felt cynical, like she was judging the book by its cover, or in this case, judging the man by his hoodie. She poured herself a quick glass of water from the soda fountain, the ice clinking softly in the plastic cup. She took a long drink, the cold liquid soothing her dry throat. She looked back over her shoulder toward the corner booth. The man was eating the burger. He wasn't picking at it or complaining. He was actually eating it with a quiet sort of focus, as if he were enjoying every bite. It threw her off balance. In her line of work, people usually looked for a reason to be unhappy. If the toast was burnt, they yelled. If the coffee was cold, they demanded a refund. But this guy had been handed the wrong meal, and he was acting like she had given him a gift. It made her feel small, and not in a good way. She wiped her hands on her apron and decided to go back. She didn't have to. She could have ignored him until he signaled for the check. But she needed to know why he was so calm. She needed to apologize again, not for the food, but for her attitude. Meanwhile, in the corner booth, the man was having a surprisingly good time. The burger was greasy, the bacon was salty, and the bun was a little bit soggy from the tomato. To him, it was perfect. It tasted like reality. It tasted like the kind of meal you ate when you didn't have to worry about your cholesterol or your publicist. He took a bite and chewed slowly, watching the rain continue to lash against the window beside him. He loved places like this. There was no pretense. The walls were thin, the floor was sticky, and the people were real. He watched the waitress moving behind the counter. He saw her shoulders slump as she leaned against the register for a split second, closing her eyes to gather her strength. He noticed the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture of weary frustration. He knew that look. He had worn that look himself plenty of times in his life. He knew what it felt like to be tired in your bones, to wonder if you were doing enough, to feel the weight of the world pressing down on your back while everyone else just saw you as a function, a waiter, a driver, an actor. It was a lonely feeling. He took a sip of the black coffee. It was bitter and strong, just the way he liked it. He set the cup down and turned another page in his book, though he wasn't really reading the words anymore, he was just listening to the rhythm of the diner. The clink of spoons against ceramic. The low murmur of conversations. The sound of life happening all at once. The waitress appeared at the side of the table again. She held a silver coffee pot in one hand. "Refill?" she asked. Her voice was softer now. The frantic, sharp edge was gone. The man looked up and smiled. He closed the book and slid his cup forward. "Please. That would be great." She poured the coffee, the dark stream swirling into the cup. She hesitated for a moment, the pot hovering in mid-air. She looked at his face, really looked at it, trying to find the actor behind the scruff and the shadows. But she didn't see a movie star. She just saw a guy who seemed to understand the world better than most. "I meant what I said earlier," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "About you looking like him." It's really uncanny. The eyes, mostly. He chuckled softly. He wrapped his hands around the warm cup. I get that, he said. It happens. It must be annoying, she said, leaning against the edge of the booth for just a moment. She wasn't supposed to loiter, but she felt drawn to his calmness. People staring at you. Comparing you to someone famous. It has its moments, he replied. He didn't elaborate. He didn't boast, and he didn't complain. He just left it there. She sighed, her shoulders dropping another inch. Well, I'm sorry if I was, you know, a bit sharp earlier. It's just been one of those days. Everything is going wrong. The kitchen is a mess, my feet are killing me, and I feel like I'm forgetting everything. She stopped herself, embarrassed. Why was she telling a customer this? She didn't know him. He was just a guy passing through. But something about his presence made it feel safe to talk. He didn't have a phone in his hand. He wasn't looking around the room. He was just listening. The man nodded slowly. His expression didn't change, but his eyes grew a little more intense. It's a tough job, he said. People don't realize how much running around you do. You're carrying the whole place on your shoulders. The waitress blinked. She wasn't used to hearing that. Usually, customers just saw her as a vending machine with legs. Yeah, she said quietly. It feels like that sometimes. You're doing a good job, though, he said. It wasn't a flirty compliment. It wasn't empty words. It sounded like a genuine observation, like he was critiquing a performance but in the nicest way possible. I've been watching. You haven't dropped anything, you're polite even when people are rude, and you keep moving. That takes skill. A warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. She felt a sudden prick of tears in her eyes, which was ridiculous. She hadn't cried over a customer's compliment in years. She swallowed hard, pushing the emotion down. Thanks, she mumbled. I needed to hear that today. It's been a lot. We all have those days, he said. He took a sip of his coffee. The key is to just get through it. 1 hour at a time. 1 cup at a time. He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. It was a tired smile, a weary smile, but it was full of understanding. It was the smile of someone who had been through the fire and come out the other side. The waitress looked at the burger on his plate. He had eaten almost all of it. How was it at least the kitchen got the patty right, even if I messed up the order? It was exactly what I needed, he said. Honestly, I think I preferred it over the sandwich. Sometimes the mistakes are better than the plan. She laughed, a genuine laugh this time. I'll tell the chef that. He'll love hearing that his mistakes are better than his menu items. He seems passionate, the man said, glancing toward the open kitchen window where they could hear the chef shouting at a dishwasher. He's a nightmare, she whispered, grinning. But he makes a good burger. She stood up straight, checking the room to make sure no other tables were flagging her down. I should get back to it. But let me know if you need anything else. Another refill dessert. I'm good, he said. Just the check when you're ready. Okay, she said. She walked away, feeling a strange lightness in her step. The restaurant was still noisy. The dishes were still dirty. The chef was still yelling. But the heavy weight that had been pressing down on her shoulders an hour ago felt lighter. It was a small interaction, just a few minutes of talking, but it had shifted the energy of her day. She went back to work, wiping down tables and pouring water, but her mind kept drifting back to the corner booth. She wondered who he really was. He didn't give off the vibe of a struggling actor looking for a break. He didn't give off the vibe of a rich guy slumming it. He just felt solid. Like a rock in the middle of a rushing river. The man finished his coffee and sat back in the booth. He watched the waitress move through the crowd. She was smiling a little more now. She wasn't rushing quite as frantically. He was glad. He knew how hard it was to keep going when the world felt like it was pushing against you. He looked out the window. The rain was starting to slow down, turning from a heavy downpour into a fine, misty drizzle. The gray sky was brightening just a fraction. He took a deep breath and reached into his pocket to pull out his wallet. It was a simple leather wallet, well worn. He didn't have a flashy black card or a money clip. Just some cash and a few cards. He placed the money on the table, tucking it under the edge of the plate so it wouldn't blow away if the door opened. He wasn't in a hurry to leave. He was enjoying the lingering warmth of the meal and the strange, quiet connection he had made with a stranger in a busy diner. It wasn't about the food anymore, it was about the shared experience of being human, of being tired, and of finding a moment of grace in the middle of a chaotic day. He sat there, letting the noise wash over him, feeling more like himself than he had in weeks. The man in the hoodie took one last sip of the water in his glass. The ice had mostly melted, leaving the liquid lukewarm and clear, but he drank it anyway out of habit. He pushed the chair back, the metal legs scraping softly against the linoleum floor. It was a quiet sound, easily lost in the din of the diner, but to him, it signaled the end of his break from the world. He needed to get back to his own life, to his own responsibilities, but for these few minutes, he had successfully hidden in plain sight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few folded bills. He didn't count them in front of anyone. He just placed them on the table, tucking them carefully under the edge of the plate where they wouldn't blow away or get swept up by a passing busboy. It was more than enough to cover the burger and the coffee. In fact, it was a lot more. He knew that. He knew what it was like to worry about rent, to look at a bank account and feel that sinking feeling in your stomach. He didn't do it for the attention. He didn't do it to be a hero. He just did it because he could, and because he knew it might make a rough week a little bit easier for someone who deserved a break. He pulled his hood up, shielding his face once more, and slid out of the booth. He moved toward the door, keeping his head down. He passed the waitress as she was dropping off a check at a nearby table. She was smiling a genuine smile now, the one he had helped coax out of her a few minutes ago. He didn't stop to say goodbye. He didn't want to break the spell. He just walked past her, another shadow in the stream of people coming and going. He reached for the door handle, the metal cool under his palm. The bell above the door chimed a bright, happy sound that seemed to cut through the gloom of the afternoon. He stepped out into the wet air. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, floating in the air like a cold breath. He took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of wet pavement and car exhaust. It was the smell of the city, alive and messy. He pulled his jacket tighter around him and turned up the collar. Without a backwards glance, he merged into the foot traffic on the sidewalk, disappearing into the gray afternoon, just another face in the crowd. Inside, the rush was finally starting to die down. The lunch crowd was dispersing, heading back to their offices or their homes. The diner felt a little emptier, a little quieter. The waitress let out a long, shaky breath. She felt drained, but in a good way. Like she had run a marathon and actually finished it. She glanced toward the corner booth and saw it was empty. The man with the book was gone. He had slipped out without saying a word. She felt a tiny pang of disappointment. She had wanted to thank him again, maybe to ask him what book he was reading. He had been the easiest customer she had had all day. Table 12 is clear, she muttered to herself, grabbing her tub of sanitizing spray and a clean rag. It was time to start the cleanup process. She walked over to the booth, her sneakers squeaking on the floor. The table looked like any other table after a customer left. There was a crumpled napkin, a few crumbs from the potato chips, and the empty glass with the melting ice. She reached out to clear the plate, her mind already drifting to what she needed to buy at the grocery store on the way home. Her hand brushed against the money under the plate. She paused. She picked up the bills. It wasn't just a single dollar bill or a 5. It was a thick stack. She unfolded them, her eyes widening. There were two $50 bills and a 20 tucked inside. $120. For a burger and a coffee that cost less than 15. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. Her hands started to shake slightly. This wasn't just a big tip. This was a massive tip. This was her electric bill for the month. This was new shoes for her kid. This was the kind of money that changed the outlook of an entire week. Did he leave this all for me? She whispered to the empty booth. She looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and say it was a prank, or that he had dropped it by mistake. But the booth was quiet. The money was real. She held it in her hands, feeling the crispness of the paper against her fingertips. It felt heavy, weighted with the unexpected kindness of a stranger. She set the money down gently on the table, afraid to lose it. That was when she saw the receipt. It was sitting face down next to the ketchup bottle. She picked it up, intending to file it away, but something on the back caught her eye. There was writing on it. Scrawled in blue ink, in a hurried but neat handwriting. She turned it over. Thanks for the kindness. Best, Kr. The blood drained from her face. Her mouth went dry. She stared at the initials. Kr. She looked back at the money. Then she looked at the empty seat. The pieces of the puzzle, which had been floating loosely in her tired brain for the last hour, suddenly snapped together with a loud, mental click. The face. The voice. The humility. The patience with the wrong order. The way he had laughed when she said he looked like Keanu Reeves. The way he hadn't corrected her. The way he had told her she was doing a good job when she felt like she was failing. Oh my God, she breathed out. Oh my God. She spun around, looking toward the front door. It had been maybe 3 minutes since he left. He couldn't have gone far. She dropped the rag on the table and ran. She dodged a startled busboy and ignored the curious look from the chef behind the counter. She pushed through the dining room, her heart pounding in her ears like a drum. She burst out the front door, the little bell ringing wildly above her. The cold air hit her face, shocking her. She looked left. She looked right. The sidewalk was crowded with people walking fast, umbrellas bobbing up and down. Cars splashed through the puddles on the street. A taxi honked its horn. She scanned the faces. Businessmen. Students. Tourists. Shoppers. She looked for a blue hoodie. She looked for a baseball cap. She looked for that specific, weary walk. Keanu, she whispered, but the word was lost in the noise of the street. He was gone. He had vanished into the city as completely as a drop of water vanishes into the ocean. She stood there for a long moment, the receipt clutched tightly in her hand, the other hand gripping the wad of cash in her apron pocket. People brushed past her, annoyed that she was blocking the entrance, but she didn't move. She felt a strange mix of emotions. There was shock, of course. The sheer impossibility of it. But there was something else, something deeper. She felt seen. She felt validated. She remembered her comment to him inside. The real Keanu Reeves wouldn't be caught dead eating in a place like this dressed like that. She covered her mouth with her hand, a flush of embarrassment rising in her cheeks. She had told a movie star that he was too good for a diner, while he was sitting there proving exactly the opposite. He wasn't too good for it. He was humble enough to be part of it. He was kind enough to see her struggle and do something about it, without ever asking for a thank you. He hadn't lectured her about being rude. He hadn't pulled the "do you know who I am" card. He had just eaten his burger, tipped her an insane amount of money, and left. She looked down at the receipt again. "Thanks for the kindness. But you were the kind one," she said softly to the piece of paper. The wind picked up, rustling her uniform. She shivered and turned back toward the warmth of the diner. The world outside seemed a little bit brighter now. The gray sky didn't look so heavy. The problems that had seemed so huge an hour ago, the rent, the rush, the stress, felt manageable now. She walked back inside, the bell chiming again to announce her return. The noise of the restaurant wrapped around her, but it didn't feel like a burden anymore. She walked behind the counter and carefully folded the receipt. She tucked it into her wallet, right next to the cash. She wasn't going to spend the money on just anything. She was going to remember this day every time she used it. She went back to the corner booth to finish cleaning it. She sprayed the table and wiped it down in slow, circular motions. She scrubbed away the crumbs and the sticky spots. As she worked, she thought about the man. She hoped wherever he was now, he was warm. She hoped he was happy. She hoped he knew that his small act of grace had fixed a broken day for someone he didn't even know. The chef yelled out an order from the kitchen, breaking her trance. "Table 4 is waiting," he shouted. The waitress took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and pasted a smile on her face. This time, the smile was real. "Coming," she called back. She grabbed a notepad and headed toward her next table. Her feet still hurt, and the shift was far from over, but she felt lighter. She felt like she was walking on air. It was just a Tuesday, and it was just a diner, but for a few minutes, magic had happened in the corner booth. And she had $120 and a signed receipt to prove that sometimes, the best stories are the ones you don't realize you're living until the main character has already walked out the door.